So I'm gonna be honest, I actually wanted to build this commander, and I didn't know what angle I wanted to go at originally, and then I got this comment here from Dorito Dust 0076 saying, could you possibly take a crack at Xavier Sal, Infested Captain? I think there might be some goofy stuff possible with what he's got going on. And so I decided that I would go ahead and make one of my $15 league decks with him. And the angle that I decided to go was actually modular. So let's go ahead and take a look at what Xavier Sal, this guy right here, has to offer as a commander. So he is a Sultai commander for 3/3. You can either tap him to get rid of a counter from a creature you control to populate, which means you make a token that you already control. And then you can sacrifice a creature with his other tap ability to proliferate, which means you get to look at all of the counters that exist on the board, and you can add one more of any number of those counters. If a player has infect counters, you increase those. If a player has loyalty counters on planeswalkers, you can increase those. 1/1 counters, yada, yada, yada. So what are we going to be doing with this? Well, first I got to ask you a question. Do you know what modular is? Because when I say modular, people think of a deck being able to be modal, going into multiple different avenues. But no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about these guys right here. These little dudes like Arcbound Worker. Who says that he is a little guy with a 0/0 power base, but he also happens to have modular. He's a pretty cool creature, and I like him a lot because I also play Modern, and the deck that I play most in Modern is Hardened Scales. And cards like Arcbound Worker are used for, let's just say, lethal strategies in decks like Hardened Scales. So I was super excited to make another deck that got to just cram a bunch of the modular creatures in. Now, obviously, there's a couple we can't run, like Arcbound Ravager, because we are, in fact, running a budget deck here. The entire deck comes out as a price point of $15.85, with the commander taking up 41 of those cents there, as you can see here. So let's go ahead and get into what the deck is doing. It's just a couple pennies above what the league generally would allow for, but I think because of the way the market switches back and forth on the price of cards, it is important to allow a degree of variance there. But let's go ahead and first look at what our game plan is going to be. Our game plan is going to be to get creatures out onto the board and then blow them up multiple times to proliferate, and then swing out with a giant board of creatures that all have a ton of 1/1 counters, or we've got a few other ways to win the game besides that. But let's go ahead and look at the stars of this deck, the modular creatures themselves, and they're going to give us basically the guide we're looking for how the deck's going to run. Let's start with Arcbound Bruiser. He's a 5-mana 3/3, which basically means he's coming out with 3/1/1 counters. And here's the important part. If a creature with modular dies, it's 1/1 counters, then transfer to another artifact creature you control. So this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be getting modular creatures out, sacrificing them. Their counters are going to go to other things we control, and then we're proliferating those counters up with Javier's ability. Also, we're going to be killing people with this little card here. This card here is Arcbound Crusher. It's a 4-mana 1/1, and that sounds bad, except it says when an artifact enters the battlefield from anybody at all, anybody playing Mana Rocks, they give counters to this guy. This guy gets a 1/1 counter every time a player, not just you, plays an artifact. So we're going to get this guy huge really, really quickly, and then we're going to use him to smack people in the face, and then if people try to kill him, even exile him, we're just going to use our commander, get rid of him, throw him to the graveyard so his counters can go to something else we control, and then we're going to reanimate him back up so that he can slowly start building again. The idea is that in a good world, our counters shouldn't be leaving at any point during the game unless we have to suffer through a board wipe fully. Then we have Arcbound Fiend. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can move a 1/1 counter from a creature you control onto the Arcbound Fiend. It has Fear and Modular 3. The Arcbound Hybrid has Haste and Modular 2. Arcbound Lancer is a 7-mana. It's a big boy, but it has First Strike and Modular 4. Arcbound Slith is a 2-mana Modular 1 that if it deals damage to a player, we can put a 1/1 counter on it. We actually will make this thing hit people with a flying counter later in the game. Arcbound Stinger already has Flying and Modular 1. Arcbound Arcbound Wanderer is 6 mana with modular Sunburst. So for every colored mana we spend into it, it gets a 1/1 counter. The Arcbound Worker, a 1 mana 1/1 with modular. And then the Scrapyard Recombiner. This card gets 2 1/1 counters when it comes into play, because it's a modular creature. But also, you can sack any artifact to search your library for a construct card and reveal that card and put it into your hand. So, if you have any constructs that you want to pull out, this card can get rid of them. This can also primarily be used in our deck to make sure that if somebody tries to exile one of our cards, which importantly will stop its trigger from going off, we're going to tap this, sacrifice our card instead, and then make sure that our die's triggers will continue to happen regardless of what our enemies try to do. But there are some honorary modular creatures we need to talk about, and these are the counters creatures here. Iron Apprentice is a 0/0 that gets a 1/1 counter when it comes into play, and if it dies, if it has counters, you can put those counters on another creature instead. So this is an interesting card. It's not got modular on it, but it kind of does. It can give the counters to any creature instead of a artifact creature. So if you stack a bunch of modular creature counters onto it and then kill it, it can put its counters on the commander, and then the commander can just swing into somebody and kill them. So that's an avenue we can use to just pump up our commander's power to try to Voltron somebody's life down in a single swing. It's a funny move we have access to. We don't want to do it that often, but if we have to, 21 damage with Xavier is pretty easy using this little twerp. Same strategy, different card, Sparring Construct. When it dies, you can put a 1/1 creature on any target creature you control. We can use this to make sure that we get the 1/1 counter onto something like Xavier early on, so that every time we proliferate, we are getting it bigger and bigger and bigger. So when you proliferate, you can't put counters on a card that didn't already exist on it. This can make sure that things like our commander get those counters. Then we have this big mana boy called Hexavis. This guy is neat. He's a flying creature. He comes into play with 6/1/1 counters. Then we can remove a counter, a 1/1 counter from him to put a flying counter on another target creature. Or we can remove a counter from him to put a 1/1 counter. We can remove a counter from any card we control to put a 1/1 counter on Hexavis. Put a pin in this card. There's something neat we get to do with this card. We'll get to the ramp section in a second. But that's what this guy is going to be important to us. We can either use this to make sure that something like our commander or another card gets a flying counter so it can be evasive and get in on people, or, well, I'll show you what he's going to do. This guy is going to win us games. He's going to be very, very funny, haha, when he does. We've got Threefold Thunderhulk, a new card from Ixalan. He's 7 mana for a 3/3, which sounds bad, but trust me, he's going to do work for us. When he enters the battlefield, create a number of 1/1 gnome artifact creatures equal to its power. And when he attacks, he creates those gnomes too. You can sack an artifact to put a 1/1 counter on him. So here's what we're going to be doing. The Threefold Thunderhulk comes into play. It makes a bunch of creature tokens. We're going to use our commander. We're going to sack one of those tokens to proliferate, making the Threefold Thunderhulk get 1 more 1/1 counter. And then we're going to swing with it, generating 4 gnomes, and then we're going to tap our commander to make it even bigger. So this is what the Threefold Thunderhulk already does internal to itself. But because our commander gets to proliferate our entire board, all of our creatures with 1/1 counters will be benefiting from this. And sometimes even some of the gnomes we have, we can use things like the Sparring Construct or the Iron Apprentice to put counters on even the gnomes and slowly start building them up. Or some of the other ways we have to put counters on creatures, like this next section, the counter placing section, Steel Overseer. We can put a 1/1 counter on every artifact creature we control. That includes the gnomes from the Threefold Thunderhulk. Renata, every time a creature comes into play, put a 1/1 counter on it. Master Chef, if we have our commander, when a creature comes into play, put a 1/1 counter on it. Death's Presence, this is basically Ozolith at home. If a creature you control dies, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control, based on the number of power, or the amount of power that creature had. So like if you've got a 10/10 modular creature and it dies and it throws 10 counters onto another creature, this is putting 10 more counters onto another creature. You can see how we can use stuff like this to just immediately make our commander hit for big damage. And then this lovely little card here, this is one of our secondary win cons of the deck. If you cast an artifact spell with while Lux Artillery is on the board, it gains Sunburst, which means it gets a 1/1 counter for every single color mana you spend into it. So if you're taking, say, you know, these cards that are super mana inefficient, like the Threefold Thunder Hulk, or the Arcbound Bruiser, or the Arcbound Crusher, we spend 3 of the colored mana in our deck on it. Suddenly, these are coming in with 3 more 1/1 counters. So you're spending, say, 7 mana for the Threefold Thunder Hulk. It comes into play as a 6/6, generating 6 gnomes. Suddenly, that value is just amazing. You're getting a ton of extra power on all your modular creatures. You're getting a ton of extra power on even little things like the Iron Apprentice or the Sparring Construct. Now they are 1 mana 2/2s. Hexavis is coming into play with more counters. The Steel Overseer is coming into play with 2 1/1 counters. Now suddenly he's going to be able to be proliferated even easier. This card is a beautiful, beautiful card that I didn't know existed until I started building this deck, and holy shit, this thing is amazing. But I know normally we get to the ramp section earlier, but I think it's a good time to get to the ramp section now, because our ramp section actually has a lot of stuff that's integral to the deck's strategy. That's why I didn't want to do it first, because you needed to know what the deck was doing for the ramp section to make sense. So let's go ahead and go over our ramp section. The first one is Devoted Druid. Now I know, welcome to the world of Magic the Gathering. We finally found a way to break Devoted Druid. Devoted Druid's a 2 mana 0/2. Tap it to make a green mana, and then you can put a -1/-1 counter on Devoted Druid to untap it. So, do you remember Hexavis? Hexavis says remove a counter from any creature you control. And when you remove that counter, put a 1/1 counter on Hexavis. Oh, by the way, that costs 1 mana. So we're going to use Devoted Druid, get a green mana, untap it by putting a -1/-1 counter on it, and then we're going to take Hexavis, and we're going to untap the Devoted, we're going to get rid of the -1/-1 counter that's on the Devoted Druid. And now suddenly the Hexavis just got the 1/1 counter for free. We can do this infinitely. Now we get to go, hey guys, do you have the ability to deal with my 6,785 damage Hexavis? And if he dies, are you okay with me just keeping the 1/1 counters on him and throwing them to something else with Death's Presence? Are you all right with that series of events? No? Well, that blows ass, because it's happening anyway. This combo is silly. The Devoted Druid combo with Hexavis is a bonkers way we have to just immediately turn our flying ship into a god. Next, we have the Everflowing Chalice, though. This card has multi-kicker. We can get a colorless mana for every single charge counter on it, and we get a charge counter by multi-kickering into it. But we are playing a proliferate deck because of what our commander says. So actually, we're going to pay 2 and turn it into your standard, everyday, generic, 2-mana mana rock. And then we're going to turn it into a 2-mana mana rock by just proliferating. And then it's going to be a 2 mana for a 3 mana mana rock. And then a 2 mana for a 4 mana mana rock. Every time we use Javier's ability and proliferate, the Everflowing Chalice is going to get that much stronger. Oh, by the way, Rotating Fireplace is the same exact card. 3 mana, and then it comes into play with a time counter. Tap it, add an amount of mana equal to the number of time counters that are on it, and you can pay 4 mana to tap it and time travel. That just allows you to put time counters on it. That's not important. This is just a 3 mana mana rock that becomes a Worn Power Stone when we use our commander once, and then it becomes a Thran Dynamo when we use our commander again. And then, every time we use our commander, this and the Everflowing Chalice get even stronger. Oh, by the way, did you know this card existed? Because I didn't. Nardole the Resourceful Cyborg. Add blue mana for every counter that's on it, and it has Undying. So here's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be sacking this card, this ramp creature, with our commander, and then it's going to reanimate itself back up, gaining a 1/1 counter, making it a better ramp spell, and then every time we proliferate, it is going to gain another 1/1 counter, adding more mana for us. That is no less than 3 cards that are going to have mana stacking up on them every time we proliferate. Would you like a 4th? Because Kami of the Whispered Hopes does the same thing. If a 1/1 counter would be added to a permanent you control, add another 1/1 counter to it, and then also tap, add X mana of any color, where X is the Kami's power. So we're going to get a 1/1 counter onto the Kami of Whispered Hopes with any of our myriad ways of putting 1/1 counters on things. And then every time we proliferate, the Kami is going to give us even more mana, but more importantly, we're going to be able to double up on the mana that the Kami is giving us, because the Kami works on itself too. So if we put a 1/1 counter with proliferate onto the Kami, it's actually 2 1/1 counters. So the first time we get a 1/1 counter, it's tapping for 3. The second time we get one, it's tapping for 5. Then it's tapping for 7. This card is nutty. The reason this deck was so hard for me to hammer down is the Kami cost $1.27, which puts it barely outside of our budget range for most cards, and the Arcbound Crusher costs $2.18. I had to allow a little bit of give. There had to be a little bit of give to make these things work. Then we have Foundry Inspector. All our artifacts cost 1 less. Most of the deck is artifacts, so that's fine. Mere Convert, a 2-mana creature that can tap for a mana. It also has Toxic 1. So here's the thing. We don't want to win with Infect. That would make us a bad person. But if our mana dork manages to get in on somebody, I don't know, because the Hexibus gave it a flying counter, that's not my problem, then sure, I guess you just happen to have an infect counter on you, and I just happen to be proliferating every turn, and if you don't happen to stop me, I guess you die to my mana dork. I hope that's okay with you. And then the Ornithopter of Paradise. This can let you get 2 mana of any color as well. It's, you know, it's in every deck build I can manage to get it in. It's just a 2-mana Omni Dork that just, we can sack it to our commander when we need to. Having a lot of our Mana Rocks be creatures is important for Javier because we need a high creature count to justify his effect. Wayfarer's Bauble, we can get any basic land. We're a 3-mana deck, or 3 land type deck, so this is important. Search for Tomorrow can also get any type of basic land onto the battlefield untapped. We can also cast it on turn 1. That's also very important. That's the ramp package. I hope you guys understand why I wanted to talk about the ramp package after talking about the strategy of the deck. Also, let's talk about the strategy of the deck, proliferating. We have 2 cards that benefit from the proliferate text on our commander. One is Thrumming Bird. If it touches an opponent, we get to proliferate. Very, very simple, very easy to understand creature. This is letting us proliferate more than once on a turn if it's out on the board. That's all it's doing. And then there's Ezri, Stalker of Spears, which I forgot what this card did until I was making this deck. When Ezri enters the battlefield, you can pay 3 and then proliferate twice. Every time you proliferate, draw a card. So this card is nutty in the deck. Not only are we getting free draws every time we use our commander's ability, every time we're smacking people with Thrumming Bird, every time Ezri enters the battlefield and we pay 3. Not only are we drawing cards then, we're drawing cards when Ezri dies, because we will be killing Ezri with our own commander's ability when we use things like the Abnormal Endurance, because here's the reanimation section. The Abnormal Endurance, the Demonic Gifts, the Fungal Fortitude, the Return to Action, the Supernatural Stamina, or the Vat of Rebirth. We're going to be reviving Ezri with all of these and just getting his proliferate effect over and over again. We're going to be proliferating 3, 4, 5, 6 times a turn. Also, Vat of Rebirth, this is an important reanimation card in this deck. Whenever an artifact or creature is put into a graveyard, put an oil counter on it. We can remove 4 oil counters to return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield at sorcery speed. We're not going to have to wait for 4 creatures to die. Vat of Rebirth is just going to get the oil counters by nature of our deck proliferating. Also, all of our creatures that die to our commander's ability, that's why the reanimation spells are things like Supernatural Stamina. Until end of turn, a creature gains the ability where it dies and enters the battlefield under our control. Our modular creatures get to die, give their counters to a thing, automatically come back. Ezri gets to die and then auto-proliferate over and over again. If Death's Presence is on the board, we get to just get those counters doubled, tripled, quadrupled over and over again when they die because of these cards. People try to kill our commander if it's starting to get kind of overly costed. We just say no. Fungal Fortitude even has Flash. Like, all these happen at instant speed. They're all really good cards, but they're not the only ways we're going to be getting stuff back out of the graveyard. We also have the basic recursion section of the deck. Ghost Lantern. This is a funny card. We can pay 2 to get any creature from our graveyard to our hand. Throwing creatures to the graveyard all the time, so why not? We can also play it as an equipment where a creature, anytime a creature dies, I can put a 1/1 counter on the creature this is equipped to. So we just put a 1/1 counter on our commander, And then we use our commander to proliferate on itself, and then we can just start throwing this card onto any creature that somehow didn't get a 1/1 counter, generally speaking. So like Ezri or the Thrumming Bird or any of the other creatures in the deck that just don't naturally make 1/1 counters go on themselves. Ghost Lantern says, yeah, that's fine. I don't care anymore. They all get 1/1 counters. I'm proliferating my entire deck. Screw you. Scrap Trawler's also a funny card. Whenever an artifact we control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, we can take any artifact card from our graveyard with lesser mana value and put it into our hand. Now, this is one of the reasons why we actually have so many modular creatures that are costing 6 and 4 and 5 and 7. They are huge, and we want them to die to get their triggered abilities, and then things like the Scrap Trawler say, oh, okay, cool. You have so much mana, I'm just going to get any artifact from my grave back to my hand. Thanks. That was very important for me to get. Trading Post says that we can discard a card, gain 4 life, or pay a life, and make a white goat token, or we can sack a creature and get an artifact from our graveyard to our hand. If people think that our problematic artifacts are gone for good, we just play this card and say no. Also, just making the goat token so that our commander always has a token to use, kind of important. Workshop Assistant, when it dies, take an artifact card from your graveyard, put it into your hand. That's just a generally important card. Then we have more token stuff. If we're going to talk about tokens, we got to talk about this funny card, Skeletal Swarming. Each skeleton you control gets trample. And they get +X/+O, where X is the number of skeletons you control. And at the beginning of your end step, create a tapped 1/1 skeleton creature. If a creature died this turn, create 2 of those skeletons instead. So scenario 1, we're just using this to make sure that our commander always has tokens to use our proliferate. Scenario 2, let's say that we're so far into the game that our proliferate strategy feels like it might actually be spent. We go, okay, cool. Never mind. I'm just using my commander to generate more skeletons, and now I'm going to have an army of skeletons swinging for like 10 each with trample. I hope that's okay to the table. If not, it doesn't matter. It's happening anyway. So this is a card that supports our strategy throughout the game and just can be a win con if it needs to. Another token generator in the deck we have is the 6th Doctor. Whenever you cast any historic spell, we get to copy it. And the copy is non-legendary. So we can make 2 Javiers and have 2 accesses to our kill proliferate abilities. We get to have double up on our modular creatures. We get to double up on some other important creatures you'll see in a second. This card just doubles all of the stuff our deck is doing. But I gotta be honest. I can't not talk about this next section. I should be talking about the draw section of the deck. But I have to talk about these guys. I am so excited to play these guys in a deck. The Myojin. They are perfect for what our deck is doing. Myojin of Towering Might comes into play with an indestructible counter if we cast it from our hand. We can remove an indestructible counter from it to put 8 1/1 counters on any number of creatures we control and give those creatures trample. Now, here's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be summoning the Myojin of Might. It gets an indestructible counter. We're going to use our commander to create a second indestructible counter because our commander has the ability to proliferate any counter at all. We create that second indestructible counter on any of our Myojin, and then we get to go, now we put all the 1/1 counters on things, and the Myojin didn't lose the indestructible counter. That's cool. The Grim Betrayal Myojin, though, is super harmonious with what our deck is doing. It enters the battlefield with the indestructible counter, just like the other one. We can remove its counter to put any creature from our graveyard that we put into there this turn onto the battlefield. This allows us to swing with impunity. We no longer care how many of our creatures die. That is collateral we are willing to spend because they will come right back nigh infinitely. The Myojin, every single time we sack a creature to proliferate and give it another counter, the Myojin can just bring that creature back, and we can do it as many times as we want because we are proliferating. We are constantly making these indestructible creatures have more access to their own abilities. This will give us free access to everything in our grave over and over again. And remember, we've got a bunch of creatures in this deck with die as triggers, so we're doubling and tripling up on those all day long. Oh, by the way, 6th Doctor isn't the only way we have to clone our spells. Oh, no. Myojin of Cryptic Dreams. We can remove its indestructible counter to copy a permanent spell we control 3 times. Most of the spells in this deck are permanent spells. So, here's an example. There's a reason why I said the Skeletal Swarming card can just win us the game super easy. Here's why. Myojin's out. We use our commander to give it its indestructible counter, and then we remove it when we are casting something like Skeletal Swarming. Now, if a creature dies, we make 6 1/1 skeletons that will swing for 7 with trample each. And each turn, we will make 6. Not 6. No, we copy it 3 times. I'm sorry, we're making 8 skeletons, swinging for 9 each. And then the next turn, we make 8 more skeletons, swinging for 17 each with trample. That math checks out as an easy way to win the game. This is one of those decks that has one strategy it looks like we are focusing on, and then suddenly it just pivots into a different win con strategy. Oh, you thought I was trying to win with combat with my modular creatures? Nah. Army of skeletons, all coming for your asshole. Oh, but that's not the only way we have to win the game out of nowhere. Oh, no. We also have Simic Ascendancy. We can put a 1/1 counter on any creature we control, which is, you know, important for our deck. We can throw it on our commander, so our commander can win with commander damage. But if 1 or more 1/1 counters are put on a creature we control, we can then put that many growth counters on the Simic Ascendancy. And at the beginning of our upkeep, if it has 20 or more growth counters, we just win the game. Do you want to win with combat with modular creatures? We can do that. Do you want to win with a literal army of rabid skeletons? We can do that. Do you want to win by giving your entire board trample and just running over somebody's butthole? We can do that. Do you want to win by just passively doing your strategy and laying under the radar, and then suddenly you proliferate once and your Simic Ascendancy gets all 20 counters at once because your deck is just doing what it does? Yeah, we can do that too. That's super easy to do. So, if any of our other win cons fail, this is another way to make sure that our deck just gets in and does its thing. Oh, but there's one other win con in the deck that I've kept under wraps because it is yet another way that we want our commander to just Voltron into somebody if we need to. This is the Malefic Scythe. This is a card that I don't think most Magic the Gathering players know about. And I didn't know about it either until, once again, I started building this deck. Malefic Scythe enters the battlefield with a soul counter on it, and the equipped creature gains 1/1 for every soul counter on it. And every time the equipped creature dies, we get to put a new soul counter on it. I hope you understand where this is going. Our commander will proliferate to increase the amount of soul counters on it. We're going to equip this card to whatever card we're going to kill with our commander to increase the amount of soul counters on it. Eventually, the Malefic Scythe, just from our deck operating as normal, is going to have 10 to 20 soul counters on it. We just strap this to Xavier, strap a flying counter onto him with Hexavus, and then just, like a bird, he swims into somebody's butt and just cleaves them wide open. This card is silly, and it flies under the radar for so long in any game that you have it in, until finally people realize, wait, is that equipment giving things 20/20? That's kind of broken. I don't like that equipment's giving things 20/20. That's kind of stupid. But now I can get to the last section of the deck. I wanted to talk about this section earlier like I normally would, but there's too many things this deck is doing that I'm really excited about, so we're going to get to the draw section now, and there's a theme with all the draw section. Every single card in our draw section can draw a ton of cards, so we're a little lower on draw than normal. I like to run between 10 and 12 draw spells. I could only fit about 7 in this one, so hopefully the types of draw spells I selected will do us the work that we need to do. Armorcraft Judge comes into play and you draw a card for every creature you have with a 1/1 counter. This is repeatable with our reanimation effects, by the way. Death Reap Ritual, anytime a creature dies, we can draw a card. That counts for our opponent's ones too. Moldavine Reclamation, whenever we kill one of our own creatures, we gain a life and draw a card. Midnight Reaper, anytime one of our non-token creatures dies, we lose a life and draw a card. Fathom Mage, every time a 1/1 counter goes onto it, we draw a card, and if we bring out a creature that's bigger than the Fathom Mage, we get a 1/1 counter on automatically. I tend to play this card in a lot of like Leviathan decks that have big creatures that can constantly trigger the mage, but in this kind of deck, every time we use our commander's ability, we'll just draw a new card. Mindless Automaton. We can pay 1 to discard a card, put a 1/1 counter on it, or we can remove 2 1/1 counters from it to draw a card. because we're proliferating so much, the first time we proliferate, we just remove 2 counters immediately and draw a card with it. If we need to discard a card and then draw a card with it afterwards as a loot, we can do that, but 9 times out of 10, we just want to drop the Mindless Automaton on the board and then stack it up with our proliferate effects and then just start using it as a draw engine from there. It is probably the deck's slowest draw engine. Oracle of the Vault. We can pay 2 to tap it and exile the top card of our library. We can then play that card, and then we put a brick counter on the Vault. We can then tap it to exile the top card of our library and play it without paying its mana cost if there are 3 or more brick counters on the Vault. So, we're only ever going to use this card once as it's written. We tap it, we get the brick counter on it, and then we get to play a card. Then our commander's going to proliferate it once. And then the second time we tap it, assuming that we even do it that way, we could just proliferate at the beginning of our next turn, putting the 3rd brick counter on this. And then from that point on, we just get to tap this and get a free spell or a draw spell every single turn. Like, we just had to put the brick counter on it once. And then the deck operating as normal will make sure the Oracle's Vault can draw us cards. So, it's a very, very basic card that our deck is just primed to abuse. Now, we aren't running as much removal as I generally would like because we are trying very hard to lean into these modular synergies, but the ones we were able to fit in are mostly on theme for us, actually. Canker Bloom has the ability to sacrifice itself to either proliferate for us, blow up an artifact or an enchantment. Carnivorous Canopy can blow up artifacts and enchantments or creatures with flying, and it can proliferate us if the card happens to be weak enough. Reject Imperfection is the deck's one and only counterspell because it also has a proliferate clause attached to it. Deadly Brew makes everybody sack a creature or a planeswalker, and if we get rid of a permanent this way, then we can get another permanent from our graveyard straight to our hand. Rise of the Witch King is identical, except it can put the card onto our battlefield, which makes it just a little bit stronger in my opinion. Then we have Feed the Swarm, blowing up any creature or enchantment that we see fit, and then we have Mono Skeleton, who comes into play with a 1/1 counter, and then we can remove his counters to deal a damage to any singular target. So this card is basically Tri-Skeleton, but a lot smaller. We're going to be summoning it and then proliferating it up, and then if it dies with Death Presence out, then that's cool. Otherwise, we're just going to be using it as a little sniper stick to kill dorks on the board, kill problematic cards. Even if somebody puts down something scary like a Draenith Magistrate, we're just going to bop the card a couple times and kill it. Anyway, that is it for the removal section. As for the land base, normally I like to have a decent bit of omni lands or dual lands in a deck, even on a budget. I didn't really have to do that on this one, though, because the deck is mostly green and black, and realistically, most of the cards are colorless, right? So we do have 12 forests, 6 islands, and 8 swamps as our basic lands. We do have some fetching lands in the Bant, Esper, Grixis, and Jund Panorama, also the Promising Vein and Shire Terrace. And then we have Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds if we want some of these slower ways of fetching lands out of our decks. And then we have 3 Omni-lands, Command Tower, Exotic Tower, and the Great Hall of the Citadel. Great Hall actually is kind of important because it lets us pay 1 of any color mana, including colorless, to add 2 mana in any combination of colors to cast legendary spells. So because we need to get our commander out as fast as possible, this land can just go, oh, I've only been drawing these guys, and I'm not in a position to sacrifice them for a color yet. That's cool. I'll just pay 1 of these into the Great Hall. Now I've got 2 of my commander's 3 colors. A basic covers whatever the last color is. I'm golden. Great Hall of the Citadel, if you have a multicolor commander that has 3 or more pips, this is probably a card I'd consider including in your decks more often when you're running on a budget, because the Great Hall can make sure that you get to your commander as fast as possible. So hopefully y'all enjoy this deck, and I really, really hope that Dorito Dust ends up enjoying this. They did ask me if I could go ahead and make the Xavier deck and what my take on it would be, because I do play modular / hardened scales in Modern. I really, really, really wanted to go that route with Xavier. I know that he's seen as like a Super Frenzy commander most of the time, letting planeswalkers that make tokens just feed into his proliferate ability. But the fact that, for me, I can use him to just make 1/1 counter strategies go burr is amazing. Now, I would have liked to fit things like Hardened Scales and Ozolith into this deck as well, because they are just beautiful for this kind of strategy, but with the restrictive budget of the $15 leagues, I really could not find a way to make those cards fit in. So, if you want to put money into this deck, that's a thing you can do, but honestly, you really don't have to. You really don't have to do that. It works basically as is. So, let me know what you guys think about the deck. Let me know in the where you're at with this thing in the comment section below. If you have a deck idea that you want me to cover, please let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know your thoughts on this one as well, if you had any cards that you would swap out within the budgetary restrictions. But this has been my take on Xavier Sal, Infested Captain, and hopefully y'all enjoy it. As always, everybody, leave a like if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't already, and insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.